Hello, everyone. This is Professor Hamamoto. It is the first day of the month, September 2022, and it is 3 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. Welcome, one and all. It's good to see you here in the live chat. Kate, Helmut, Piper, Michael, Corky, my Cosmos, and everybody else that's going to be coming in later. I've been very gratified with the relatively, because there's some exceptions, high level of comments that I've been getting in response to my talks. I guess it's getting through that I'm serious here. I'm not about parlor games. My agenda is quite different from what many people who pass through YouTube are used to. And I'm gaining a quality. I already have a quality audience, but that quality audience is expanding gratefully. And please, for people have them subscribe. I want to hit the 10,000 mark sooner than later, certainly within the end of this month. That'll give me additional impetus to put even more energy into this very difficult work that we're doing, especially since my work, not only is it highly original, but it's an attempt to assess contemporary live action, ongoing, happening right here and now type of activity, especially books and certain figures that appear. And I say that because I'm going to be tackling this one person who seemed to appear out of the ether. Her name is Dr. Debra Soh, S-O-H. I think she's Korean by ethnicity. She's Canadian Korean. And the title of this talk, of course, alludes to, and I've mentioned this book earlier. I didn't really delve into it very carefully, but the title of today's talk, "What is a Dr. Debra Soh?" question mark, alludes to this book by a individual named Matt Walsh, who I was not familiar with at all. And again, I'll say it at the outset. I think Matt Walsh also needs to be approached with a high degree of skepticism for reasons that people who are in the chat room are well acquainted with. We know that the people who control the culture, the ideology, the dominant ideology, play both sides. They play all of it. It's called full spectrum dominance. You're familiar with that. So just to give you kind of a preview of where I'm going with this, I think Dr. Debra Soh, and maybe even by extension Matt Walsh, and some of these other figures that are going to be popping up, even if they might not subscribe to or are sincere in their own efforts, they might be used as stalking horses or Trojan horses, if you will, for this larger agenda, which I'll just mention as transhumanism. Dr. Debra Soh, I suspect, is a entryway by coming out as the heroine of all of us who are frustrated by the fake gender wars, right? We've been hearing all this stuff, seeing it in conservative media in particular, all the name calling from Trigglypuff to story hour, whatever it is at the library, which are all part of the psyops, and the conservative media are as guilty of contributing to it and exacerbating as the handlers themselves. They've been playing conservative media like a fiddle. But for those of us who have a higher level of understanding and get tired of watching, Owen Schroyer or Alex Jones or Ben Shapiro or Stu Peters just mocking, and even some of these other Glenn Beck just kind of mocking these people without really getting into this. For those of us who are beyond that and only tolerate it because we need to see where the head's at of the larger rank and file, and the most peevish aspect of these people that I mentioned is that they're sucking the attention away. They have the most audience, right? And it's not because I'm jealous, because my work is boutique. It's specialized. I understand that, but even if they were to, and by the way, I've been on some of these shows that I just mentioned, right? But if they were to have years ago even followed up on some of the slight, um, not slight, I think they were really profound contributions about over 7 years ago. I was talking about this on the Alex Jones show. But if he was to follow up, if he had followed up on some of the names and the leads that I had provided at great danger to my professional, I'm sorry for, playing sympathy. Believe me, I'm over it. But it's part of my history here. At great risk to my academic career, I think we wouldn't have to wait for Matt Walsh as a stalking horse. We would have been further ahead. Time is precious in this transhuman agenda that's in full play here. Um, we have a lot of catch up to play. Not Heinz ketchup, but they have the lead on us, and so it should be no surprise. And I know I'm not. This is nothing new to Alex and Gonna Cry 96 Tears and Nadia and Christy. This is not news to you. You know that the other side, the opposition, represented by the usual suspects, but big pharma, the City of London, the power of centers, the Tavistock Institute, which is more germane, by the way, to the work of Debra Soh than it ever has been with the Beatles, which, according to former MI6 John Coleman, is the bane, it's the downfall of human civilization. And I keep hearing even now this repetitious um, distraction, but and I think it's put out there because it's really disguising the fact that it's the Tavistock Institute, which is providing the intellectual as well the medical and financial leadership for this whole transsexual revolution that's going on, which is indeed a gateway to the post-human revolution that underlies such grandiose concepts as the so-called Great Reset, right? As put forth by Uncle Klaus Schwab. So, as I describe in the talk today, I'm looking at the sudden, maybe I've been out of touch, but for me it's sudden, multimedia emergence. That is, she's got a podcast, she's interviewed on all these different supposedly conservative outlets because she's telling us what we want to hear after hearing years and years of Trigglypuff and rainbow-haired women beating up guys on the street and kicking their signs. You've seen all that stuff, all these provocations. It's a sudden multimedia, transmedia emergence because she appears in a documentary, before I forget, by Matt Walsh. This book was adapted to a documentary, which was recommended to me by my friend and sponsor. He's a Patreon sponsor. I tell you, I got quality all across the board, and I'll give you information on how to subscribe to Patreon to support this work. Allow me to buy books like this, which wasn't cheap, really. My gosh, yeah, this one's like close to $30, and it's really not that substantial. That's about the price of an academic book. Not to denigrate, I'm just putting in perspective. Anyway, I don't want to get off topic, but I wanted to thank Dr. Roland Tay for recommending What is a Woman? You can find it on one of those independent channels. I think good for him. Matt Walsh and his sponsors are making the documentary widely available free of charge. It's called, just like the book, What is a Woman? And I do encourage you to view it at your earliest convenience. And and I'm telling you this is because when I was watching, I was, oh yeah, I'm like, anybody else. I'm having this knee-jerk emotional response to all these experts that are saying this is bunk. Of course, he has a lot of straw men and women, or straw men women, Matt Walsh, that is, who he goes to visit, from a professor of so-called gender studies at the University of Tennessee to medical practitioners, including surgeons, um, therapists, and I think the most gripping interview of all was by an individual himself who had gone through the entire transsexual surgery, and it's meant to him nothing but incredible health problems, mental health problems. And you watch the documentary. I think that's the most important, if I may say so, interview of them all. And to his credit, he's formed an organization amongst people like himself, which are beginning to accelerate in numbers. This is a grand human experiment that someone like Dr. Mengele could only dream about. And we do not know, but we can only imagine the long term effects of a cohort of young people in particular who've been targeted for this type of inhumane experimentation. Now, when I say experimentation, most of the drugs that they're using for so-called treatment are classified as experimental, which, by the way, as I learned from this individual who went through the treatment, makes them incapable or unable to sue them in a court of law. He wanted to sue them for malpractice, these people for malpractice, but only one attorney out of the last one he talked to, I think he talked about 7 or 8 attorney, would take the case because there's no baseline level of treatment by which they could evaluate this whole idea, this whole notion, this whole argument of medical malpractice. So it's all been very plotted out and theorized from the standpoint of jurisprudence and the legal repercussions, as well as further upstream academia, which I was seeing happen. I was trying to think about when I heard of a very well-informed source when I was a recent graduate of the PhD program at UC Irvine, and she said, "You better revise a lot of, or start thinking in your work, take in consideration of what she was observing." And she said, "There's a whole upsurge of it wasn't called GLBTQ, it wasn't even called queer studies at that point, but she said within UC Irvine, and she was seeing it because was an administrator. She was seeing across the board." This is around, I'd say, 1980, 40 years ago, 80, 81, 82. So she was kind of giving me the heads up, and I thought about it, and I took it in consideration, and now I finally connect, because I don't think she had a full understanding of where it was going. But now I understand that we are in the full flower of what she, as a mid-level administrator, was warning me about. So I had already been alerted to it. I was sensitized. This is what I'm talking about now. I've been talking about publicly for at least 8 years, and I've been teaching it for about 15 years, because I did I devise, I conceptualize, and miraculously, because it has to go through an intense oh, peer review in the university system to see that it's, cool to it has enough academic rigor. And I got it through the syllabus, unique, first ever done. I'm trying to find where it is. I have some old files, all syllabus, all these lectures. I'm going to try to find that syllabus and provide it to my Patreon groups to show you that I'm not lying. I've been lecturing about this. Course was titled Asian American Sexuality. Yes, you might think, well, sexuality. No, it's not. It's lived differently, whether you are a man or a woman. Even Debra Soh would admit that. In fact, she has a whole entire chapter debunking the myth that women dating should behave like the way men behave. Right? She debunks that myth, and she draws a lot from a psychologist, an evolutionary psychologist by the name of David Buss, Buss. He's someone that you might want to check out. I don't know if he endorses her work or not, but I've been checking him. So anyway, getting back to the point, I conceptualize, and through some miracle, I got this course passed through the University of California, UC Davis process, only because I had the foresight to get in on this before my colleagues were even aware that there was something that was being already in the offing and already being financed, that later became queer studies, women and gender studies. All right. So I do have some prescience here. So I really resent that jerk who said, "Oh, I made a rookie mistake about Dr. Seuss." Look at the comments on the other one. Some jerkwad. He called me a rookie. Says I made a rookie mistake. Says Dr. Seuss was really about cats. So I said, you haven't done your work. And by the way, I taught Asian American studies, and Dr. Seuss was a propagandist, first and foremost. I told the story of my mentor, Carlton Moss, who directed the film The Negro Soldier, right? He knew Teddy Giesel. He knew about him. He knew that he was OSS and intelligence. Okay, I'm just telling you this because a lot of the stuff I'm telling you, it's always beggars credulity because it's always ahead of the curve. And I think that's why the quality audience I have really appreciate the work I'm doing here. So anyway, just to end my establishing my credibility and my bona fides, I developed a course in human Asian American sexuality. A lot of Asian American sexuality, I think, is, for example, due to the mass internment of Japanese American. Most of the children of internees that came out of the concentration camps during World War II, most of them did not marry Japanese Americans. Most of them did not even marry Asians. Most of them married white people. Um, and I'm not against interracial relationships, but I was reading this autobiographical piece. I'm already beginning to digress. Piece about Joe Kamiya, who's one of the founders of biofeedback, and I might do a talk on him later. But he says himself the reason why he married a white woman is because of this internment experience. And it's the same way with it has to do with colonial. In the case of Japanese Americans, it was internal colonialism, but overseas colonialism, right? This American imperium, and John O'Loughlin has been talking a lot about British racism. There's something very similar going on there, but in America, it's manifests itself in the strange relationship that military men have with Filipinas in particular, and also with Filipinos, a lot of them Filipino Americans who are gay, right? They were engineered to be butt buddies of sailors because in the days before the obvious racism of having them have Filipino busboys serve the captain of the ship and the officer, they were always Filipino busboys or blacks. They were always doing, the domestic work. Now they, in the interest of equity, they, or at least pretend they have a multiplicity of that. And this is how you come up with someone like Andrew Cunanan. Remember the spree killer? His dad was a Navy guy, and on and on. Same with Korea, Koreans, all the occupied Okinawa, where I lived for 1 year, full of American military base. And by the way, African Americans are taking leadership because they're the dominant minority, and now more so Latinos. But like 1/3 of the American military, especially overseas, are black men, right? So they're making a lot of babies and leaving them there, and going back home and letting the host countries, quote unquote, with these unfair treaties, bear the burden. So that has an impact on the side. I didn't mean to go off on this digression, but it's a much deeper topic than you might imagine. It's not just about the world of Susie Wong with William Holden as the portrait artist in search of a soul with wonderful film, by the way, if you, despite it all. Okay, so I take this, adapt this title of this book by Matt Walsh, say, what is a Debra Soh? Yeah, because she has, as I alluded to earlier, she has been embraced uncritically. Uncritically is the key word here. How many times have we fallen for that? She has been embraced uncritically as the voice of opposition to the hegemonic transgenderism, ideology, and even science, fake science. This is science fraud on a massive scale that we haven't seen since the heyday of the American/Third Reich eugenics movement. She has been embraced uncritically. We saw this with Dr. Malone. I can give you multiple. We saw this with her fellow Canadian subject. They're not citizens. We are citizens. We are Americans. They are Canadian subjects, right? I get all these, you got to watch the Corbett report. What's a Canadian doing in Japan talking about America almost exclusively? Check him out. All right. I'm going to start naming names here. Okay. Right. Debra Soh is a latter manifestation, a more educated one and a more schooled one and a more accomplished one. But her predecessor was a fellow Canadian subject that you all know and love, because some of the less perceptive even try to lump me in with him. And I always correct them right away. I said, no, I'm not Jordan Peterson. Right. He kept his job and he went out on his own terms because I think he was allowed to exist as sort of a safety valve, because you got to have a little bit of relief from the orthodoxy that the rest of the public is making fun of. And then you got your Brett, what's his name? Ask on Brett. He's at Portland State. Can't remember. He became a YouTube celebrity shortly because he wouldn't stay home when they say white people, white faculty, administration, stay home. This is going to be a day people of all color, right? I forgot his name already. I'm glad I'm not that I did blank on it, because he's a non-starter. Just as, and I wasn't going to dump on Jordan Peterson, but I'm going to check out his work. I come from the academic world, and you know what? He has an academic publishing record that's about that thick. And most of it's about alcoholism. It has nothing to do with gender. And all of a sudden, he's a pundit for all ages. All right. If you like him, if you worship him, I talked with my friend and colleague Manny Grossman, who himself has taken a lot of licks, about people who fixate on personalities. And there's a whole theory about it. It's called imprinting, right? So if you read Maury Terry, everything, oh yeah, it's going to be gospel, right? Yeah, it's a Joseph P. Farrell. Man, if you don't subscribe to every single thing he says, you're not. By the way, I like his work. I respect it. And the people who tell me consistently I should be reading it are telling someone who's probably read all his work and has valued it and appreciated it. I think he's one of the top public intellectuals going today. But the point is that yeah, there's imprinting of all sorts. Maybe I've imprinted some of you. I don't want that. I want you to check out what I'm saying, verify, invalidate, challenge whatever I'm saying, because believe me, I have had to revise my own thinking, my own scholarship, my own research, my own perspective throughout my entire career, and I hope I continue to do that. Another example, a recent one, a really dangerous one, is the fixation, the identification, and the what you might call this sort of duckling phenomenon, right? It's a Conrad Lorenz. The baby ducklings follow the human being because it's the first. It's called imprinting. It's the first creature they see. They think the human beings their mama duckling. But he is a medical doctor. Dr. Andrew Kaufman spouting some errant nonsense. That's perhaps deserving another. And he's a psychiatrist. He has no background in biology. But anyway, this is an example of the social psychology, and maybe it has something to do with the social DID that I alluded to in the previous talk on Peter Sellers, right? It's no longer DID on the individual level as a psychology therapeutic transaction. It's more like a social dissociate identity disorder. And there's some approaches I'll talk about later that are very promising. One is the work of the contemporary of Sigmund Freud and of Carl Gustav Jung, person you've never heard of before. His name's Pierre Janet. Right, he was an arch rival of Freud. He was suppressed, but now he's making a comeback. So there's always hope. We can throw back this whole transgender ideology. Not science. It's fake science. It's false science. It's malpractice. It's intellectual dishonesty of the highest disorder. And it's going to help destroy the university, which might be part of the agenda. That might be well part of it, because then it'll be free for the entire corporate takeover. That's why I'm not going to walk away from the university or denounce it and saying, well, you're just going to earn some meaningless degree in women and gender studies. Right. They want all the opposition to fold their tent and walk away from it. All right, let's get into it. Right. Um, Yeah. The first time I read the book, she's not in the book, Debra Soh, but I guess they wanted some diversity. I think she's only the only non-white person in the whole document. Hey, yeah, let's get a yellow person there. She has a very small role in it. So that kind of captured my attention. Oh, wow. I like what she says. And she's talking about how women are being penalized by transgenders in sports. You know the whole story about that, so I don't have to belabor that. So they put her up there to do a little bit of a sound bite. So I said, I never heard of her. I better check her out. And so sure enough, I found out, my gosh, she is an Insta celebrity. She's going to eclipse even Jordan Peterson, who they're going to put him out to pasture. I mean, he's got some legs, I'm sure. He's got his own talent agency. I think agent. I think it's Creative Artist Agency, which I don't begrudge him. Right, Michio Kaku, all these I think public intellectual life that we used to see needs to be revived. In that sense, I really value these characters. What I do not value is these ersatz, these faux therapists that we've seen for I don't know how long. I'd say 20 years at least. It might be longer. But these doctors, right? Remember Dr. Ruth Westheimer, right? She was a little German Jewish lady who gave sexology advice. It was so incongruous, right? This little munchkin with an intense Viennese accent talking to teenagers about premarital. I don't know if you remember her, but she had her day in the sun. And then from there, you got Queen Oprah, all bow down to Oprah, Obeya, Ifa, Queen Oprah Winfrey, who's a neighbor of the British royals, along with other globalists down Santa Barbara way, Montecito. Right, I think Ellen DeGenerate lives just somewhere down there as well. They're all kind of in this precious enclave. Montecito. I'm going to give a talk on Montecito and its occult origins, because California was always a gathering point of very wealthy European as well as East Coast and let's say Chicago Midwestern wealth, where they can create their own utopias, right? Typically with a heavy underpinning of Madame Blavatsky, right? That's Montecito. But I'm digressing here. I'm trying to stay on track as best as possible. We were inundated with the plague, starting with Queen Oprah, when some guy named Phil McGraw, PhD, I'm sure Dr. Todd Grande envies him to no end, the guy with all these inflated views who reads scripted information and all these analyses. Check him out. He's very interesting. Um, but before Todd Grande, there was Dr. Phil McGraw, not a medical doctor, but he was one of these TV psychologists. First, it was radio. In our market down in LA, Orange County, we had Dr. Tony Grant. Most of them were women, but they're all psychologists, not psychiatrists, not medical doctors. And they gained instant legitimacy because they had a PhD, and you're supposed to worship anybody that has an advanced degree, I suppose. Most of them were quacks, and if you didn't understand them as entertainment, and you were one of those people who, through some dissociative event or transference, if you want to use that term, you're imprinted by these people. Another person I remember, he was very riveting, and you don't see very much. I tried to find him on YouTube. There are not a lot of examples of him, but he's very, very convincing. These people have a Rasputin-like charismatic power over their listeners or their viewers, because as I stated earlier, sometimes they did radio and TV or start on radio and move to TV. His name was David Viscott, and he was a psychiatrist. And he had a presence on LA and then the national scene for a number of years. I might be, he did die fairly early. I don't know if it was through suicide or foul play. I can't remember, but he's someone who needs to be checked out. By the way, one of the gratifying comments that I get are people who had forgotten these names: Peter Sellers or Herbert Kwok or Blake Edwards or Bo Derek, and me talking about them, they were there. They remember it. They understand the importance of it now. at a different stage in their life and see what they were being treated to, what they were being exposed to consciously. It was nothing in society, especially in the media, which is, time is money. Every single second is dollar signs, right? How much does the halftime show advertising go for the Super Bowl? So it's highly rationalized. And um, General William Paley, he was an honorific general of propaganda of CBS. All of them were brought into it early on. The story about Henry Lou's Time magazine, the Skull and Bones people, right? From the get-go, these guys were working in hand with that. And the rise of the media psychologist, which we saw, again, my timeline might be off, maybe even longer, but I'm saying at least conservatively 20 years ago, when you had people like Dr. Phil starting to appear. I don't know if he has a TV presence anymore, but he was the man for any number of years. So that's where I saw her in the documentary. I checked her out. I said, "Wow, this is great." I was very excited, like you would be, because she was making some very simple statement, like Chauncey in Being There, Peter Sellers, the movie that he most identified with because of his multiple identities, right? But she was doing Chauncey-like pronouncements, which we said, "Oh, that's really profound." So I checked her out, and lo and behold, I found her book, and it's called The End of Gender. And you can take this two ways, right? And this is why her sudden emergence is suspect, because you can think that she's protesting the end of gender, but another way of this is simple Gnostic word magic. This. The people who are regular listeners here. You're already at that level. But it could be read the other way, that it's a confirmation that the end of gender is upon us. But it's not the end of gender as the gender ideologues are telling us, right? Because she has 9 different myths that she attempts to bust, that we all, oh, yeah, great. Yeah, these people are lying. We knew that we were right all along. Common sense dictates that these people were just blowing it out of their patootie, right? And it was not based on science. And of course, those people are firmly convinced, just like I'm sure the scientists, the therapists, the psychologists, and medical professionals of the fifth, like and IG Farben and all the other combines. I'm sure even Dr. Asperger, who I'll speak about in a moment, who was Austrian, by the way, were convinced of the rectitude, the righteousness, and the solidity of their science. Fortunately, we have historical precedents that we can look at. We've had great books. John O'Loughlin is introduced to a large audience in many of these books. And for that, we owe him a debt of gratitude. Please subscribe to, and I have difficulty keeping up with the channels because he keeps getting zapped as well. But his current one is Macduff Lives 2. All right, there's been any numbers of them, and man, his show, especially I think it was today, his mind fields, his meditations are really excellent. I think I like those. I mean, I like his guests. I already gushed over Anton Chaikin, who, by the way, I might be interviewing. I don't want to jinx myself. I might be having a conversation with Mr. Chaikin myself before long. So anyway, I'm telling you this is because we're not alone. We're far from alone. We're picking up speed, even whatever she contributes dubiously in a mixed way. We're picking up steam. And unlike the old days before the internet, before these podcasts, it's happening more quickly, right? In times past, before so-called social media and in the days of the internet, it might take about 10 years before people would begin to come together with their dissent. So that's the positive aspect of the technology, right? And a good use of it. So long as we respect the way it can be deployed against us, even in the guise of helping us see through questions that we have been vexed with over the past few years, such as this book here. Let me continue. I'm speaking to cryptically. Okay, so she goes through chapter by chapter 9 myths that she debunks about sex identity in our society, and that's part of the subtitle. And then she ends with a chapter on academic freedom. Before I move on, let's take a look at who she is, right? And these are all still shots purposely. I didn't take anything off the internet or YouTube or anything, because not that demonetization hurts me. I don't have that kind of an audience. But even the last one I did on Peter Sellers, I got a notification. This is not a copyright strike, but since you used an excerpt from Dr. Strangelove, any revenue that generates from your original work is going to go to the copyright holders of Dr. Strangelove. Hey, you're welcome to it. I respect intellectual property. My goal was to be able to share those images to my audience. That's the priority right there. So anyway, I'm trying to explain to you why I don't have any glitzy videos for you, because I don't want to get this video taken down. So here she is herself, Dr. Debra Soh, and I'm not going to comment on her appearance, her looks, which scare me to death, but I'm not going to comment on that. Let's go back. I jumped the gun. Here she is. This is the little pic I put. She was on the great Glenn Beck, who sometimes he likes to play professor. Remember when he wears the Oxford shirt, the button down with the little sweatshirt? He has the chalkboard down and he just does his entire lecture. Professor, these guys are LARPing, man. Yeah, he's done his share. I mean, I'm glad he's around, but he takes a lot of eyeballs. He takes a lot of oxygen out of the room, right? Those people who are diddling with Glenn Beck need to watch Professor Hamamoto, who is a real professor. Debra Soh, you never made it as a professor. You're bitter. Let me give you the backstory as these pics come up. Here she is being interviewed on one of these other guys. She said, "Great, I think she's been on the Joe Rogan show, right? For all the muscle heads, all the people who are low in testosterone, who watch Joe Rogan, and all the muscle heads go, yeah, Joe, yeah, let's light up his spit. I mean, suck the oxygen out of the critical firmament." I don't think I ever watched him all the way through. When certain celebs show up, like Alex Jones, I'll watch it. Or Elon Musk, I'll watch the extras, but I'm not a fan. But I think the point is that she shows up on that level show. I don't know who this guy is. I can't even read it. But she's now a fixture. She's making the rounds, and they'll find someone else pretty soon. It had to be an Asian woman, right? Because they're underrepresented. This is the pic from her book jacket right here, enlarged from her publisher, which is owned by one of these global publishing conglomerates. It's a company that I would never get a contract with, right? Because they're all stocked by Ivy League women whose daddies are wealthy skull and bones types, and they call themselves literary agents and editors, right? But this is, Simon and Schuster, which has different divisions now. I don't know who the master is. Probably Hachette or some other globalist entity. Because when we talk about media, it's not just social media, it's not just Twitter and Facebook and Netflix, but also publishing. Very, very important. Not book publishing, not just newspaper, magazine, but the whole day. Anyway, this is a picture of her. She looks semi-presentable, but still fairly scary. And this started kind of getting my suspicion juices going, because I initially, like you, I said, wow, she's mouthing the words that we needed to hear. Then I read the book, and my suspicions were confirmed, and I'll get into specifics in a moment. I'm not trying to tease you. I want you to stay to the end of the cast, and I'll reveal to you at the end what the deal breaker is for me with Dr. Debra. Oh, I didn't really finish about Dr. Phil and Dr. blah, 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 and Dr. Tony Grant. Whenever, excuse me, whenever anybody has on the jacket, doctor, and they're not an MD. Excuse me. That's a red flag to tell you that someone's trying to pass himself as a psychologist, as an authority. If they're Doctor So and So, Doctor So and So, by academic protocol, the only people who are entitled to have doctor on publicly, right, in print, right, even in newspapers or on book jackets, are medical doctors. All right. Um, if you're a PhD, I don't care how you could be a physicist, you could be Edward Teller, but Edward Teller would never write a book that says Dr. Edward Teller. Believe me, I'm the god of physics. Right. So that's a tip off, just a handy deal, because I know people don't understand the protocol and some of the signs here. And if that's one practical tip I'm giving to the general audience, be suspicious immediately of anybody that calls themselves Dr. So and so on the book jacket. You'll never see me, even though I am a doctor, I hold a doctorate. We'll never say Dr. Hamamoto, New World Order. That would just, my credibility would go right into the crapper for people who are in the know. Okay, now that's a good digression because that was some practical advice here. So here is, and you can find this on your own. I did not take a clip for the reason I explained to you. You could find it on your own. This is Matt Walsh on the far left. And this is right to his immediate right is the screaming, nervous gender studies professor at University of Tennessee. My gosh, this is in the heart of the Bible Belt. It shows you the level that all the globalist foundations have been able to infiltrate the institutions of higher learning. Some of them are religious based, some of them are Catholic institutions. It's that pervasive in the academic world. And maybe that's part of the sabotage going on. The one in the middle, those are the people, and the one on the right, those are the people they like to make fun of on the Alex Jones show. It's cheap shot stuff, so I'm not going to indulge. And by the way, Matt Walsh doesn't do that. I think one of his greatest talents is his ability to hold back and just engage these people seriously for what they are, even though some of them are kind of defensive. He never loses his cool. Right. And the production values are very, very slick. I'm kind of suspicious of the amount of money that went into it. And I have to check out the organization that was behind funding it. Right. I never give anybody a pass where it comes to this type of work. So, anyway, this is the documentary in which I first saw Dr. Debra Soh. She was not in the book itself. Moving on, here she is on another podcast. I was surprised what a presence she had on it. Maybe I'm behind the curve. Maybe people in the chat room know all about her, but I'll be checking her out more against my will or my want or inclination. I'll be seeing her on some of these other shows. Anyway, I'm trying to establish that she does have this sudden appearance. And of course, she has, what synthetic celebrity can exist without having a presence on Apple iTunes? Right, that's where she is, and she has her own podcast. This one has, I don't know who Clay Routledge is, the downfall of universities. See, these are all themes that people who are on the conservative end, even some liberals, are getting sick of all the orthodoxy. They want to hear this, right? And I warn you, you've seen this time and time. We're always being whipsawed by these con artists. I'm not saying she's a con artist. I'm saying these opportunists. Let's avoid this temptations of being, oh yeah, Lynn Wood, yeah, savior here, Donald Trump, yo, yeah, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Governor Ron DeSantis, Kash Patel, all these personally. We're just being whiplash on, and that sucks oxygen from you and me, us, and our immediate circle where we can have the most effect, right? Based upon, and I agree with Anton Chaikin here, I respect him for that, based on the politics of love, a love of humanity, our fellow human being. We can do it. We have done it. We will never reach a utopian state. Anybody who promises such needs, of course, to be approached with high suspicion. But I wouldn't be doing this unless I wholeheartedly agreed with the politics of love. Continuing, here's a selfie of hers. Ooh, I promised myself. Gosh, she looks like the Oriental version. Who's that Trump spokeswoman who turned out to be a mole? Can't remember. She's really skinny. I already blotted her out of my mind, but she turned out D-Trump, right? Orange man was surrounded by treacherous people. And again, another one, okay? Bannon, he's now making all these pronunciamentos that we're supposed to hop to, But forget about Steve Bannon. He's an ugly tub of lard opportunist, and he's slick, and he has all these institutional affiliations. If he's real or not, I really don't care, because I'm about, as you know, the politics of love. Yeah. By the way, now that we've seen Peter Sellers, is it okay that I do me, Professor Hamamoto? Right? Is it okay if I do dialect every once in a while, do accents? I think so. I think I don't need anybody's permission, because some jerkwads in the comments say, stop doing the accents. Well, you know what? I give you the one-fingered peace sign. Pardon me. I'm sorry. I have to do some snarkiness. What would a podcast with Professor Hamamoto do? A vidcast with Professor Hamamoto? What would it be without a bit of snark? Okay, so here's her own selfie. Dr. Debra Soh. Don't you call her Miss Soh. Don't call her Deborah. Okay, now here's one of the good parts of the book. And Debra Soh never mentions this author, but to his credit, Matt Walsh does. I'm sure Matt Walsh, by the way, had a research team behind him where he got all this information. They're usually uncredited. I told you these books are team efforts, right? That's not necessarily bad, but they put a label on front. In this case, it's Matt Walsh, because he's got smart glasses, got a really nice, tight beard. It's really trimmed. It's almost like seeing someone in the Castro district, like it's like a real gay beard. It's incredible. But he does give credit to, and so did I. Remember, I taught the course and designed the course and got it passed through rigorous peer review, my course in Asian American sexuality. And one of the people that we read, the students, was Judith Reisman, who was the first academic, I think her PhD is in psychology, and she never, so far as I know, ever got a tenured academic position. Judith Reisman did this book that I bought back in 2008. How do I know? I went back on Amazon and looked at my purchase record. I bought this book in 2008. I was probably using it for my course over at UC Davis. And this is when, because I bought the hype about Kinsey. When I expressed outrage on all this imprinting and the celebrity worship and being whipsawed by Dr. Phil or Steve Bannon or Dr. Soh, I say that because I am prey to the same common human frailty. And I did not question the Kinsey report. I started studying sexuality when I was like 13 or 14. I was going through puberty. I wanted to wonder, what is this sex thing, So like the nerd I am, I just rode my bicycle to the bookstore and you can buy the Kinsey report for 95 cents or find it at the used bookstore. So I've been doing it for a long time, avocationally. Little did I know, or maybe I did know that it would become my profession. So the point is, Judith Reisman, Riesman. Let's give her our propers, right? Props, proper respect, RESPECT. Find out what it means to Dr. Judith Reisman. Kinsey, and I read this book and I go, my gosh, I've been such a sucker. I've been such a fool. I let Kinsey get away with some incredible, not beyond, but Mengele type experiments on little children, which Walsh goes into in the document. It's very disturbing. Again, please watch the documentary, and thank you, Dr. Roland Tay, for recommending it to me. So I had his number, and from then I said, I got to read all I can about Kinsey. I've read the two major biographies, and they're not very critical. And so I think this is still in print. And this is a more specific and polished. Um, I don't say it's a version of the previous book. It's an altogether more comprehensive look on the whole institutionalization of Kinseyism, right? Which, by the way, was initially founded by, guess who? The Rockefeller Foundation. And there still is a Kinsey Institute at the University of Indiana. And there's the archive, supposedly with all the sex movies that he made with his graduate students, his wife, and they were into swap. He was totally into what then was called perversions. By the way, Debra Soh claims that she's into what are called paraphilias. I couldn't find any academic articles by Dr. Soh on paraphilias, and she's into one paraphilia in particular. It's called furry culture, and this is where typically young people dress up as a bear, as a horse, or adopt the persona of a pony. There's this one undergraduate I met at UC Davis who told me about this subculture of gay young men called bromies. They were brothers of My Little Pony, right? Which I thought was a girl's toy, but these toys are adaptive to any number of paraphilias. So that's furries. And I'm trying to find the article, the definitive article that decided that she needed to leave academia because she still believed in the biological, gamete version of sex definition, male and female. All right, fine and dandy. Now, what she conveniently leaves on, this is why she's a stalking horse, is that if you've read, and I'll use a name that's probably familiar to a lot of us, because he's a very popular author. He's excellent. He does his research. His name's Dr. Tom Horn. I don't know what his PhD's in, but let's call him Dr. Tom Horn. And sometimes I think he puts Dr. Tom Horn on his book. He shouldn't do it. He should put Tom Horn, PhD, or something like that, because he does not want to be associated with Dr. Phil. But he's in any number of books, including the most recent one on transhumanism, says that decades ago, the idea of genomic engineering has made it moot, these definitions that Dr. Soh is trying to take us back to. So in other words, Debra Soh is trying to close the barn door after the horses have already left. Right? You know about the Human Genome Project and down UC Santa Cruz, which was also the serial capital murder of the United States for a short time. And you know how genetic engineering renders these traditional pre-biogenetic engineering definition moot. And I think that's one of the reasons why she has left the door open for the transhuman, because, and then of course she identifies first and foremost as a neuroscientist. So they're trying to, you know about the Year of the Brain under Barack Hussein Obama, right? You know about the massive infusion of funding in the neurosciences in order to bypass these other mechanisms that she's trying to revive as a exercise in nostalgia for us, and it's a diversion. She's a neuroscientist. Okay, another red flag for me was I read a blurb in this book by none other than Simon Baron-Cohen. Is that a name that's familiar to you? We've been talking about comedians over the last couple of days. Yeah, he's the brother of Borat. He's the brother of Sacha Baron Cohen. And he's, guess what? A neuroscientist. And guess what his specialty is? Autism. Autism, which is being bioengineered for the generation of children through means that I won't get into. And I know this because just looking at the statistics, looking at the data, right? When I was a kid, it was rare. and it hadn't been theorized properly. And I've been checking into it. And then an explosion of it, right? To follow, and the transgender explosion followed up on that. And I gave previously a talk on Dr. Hans Asperger, the Austrian who had his own medical clinic of people who had Asperger's. And I think they were doing the basic research to put Asperger's syndrome into the larger population, right? Where you have children now who are now considered to be on the spectrum, right? So that's Simon Sasha Cohen. So should we trust someone who's tight with not Sasha, Simon Baron Cohen? I think not. And he does have a book, which I let's see if I have it here. Yeah, I have the book. It's called it's the most recent one. I think it's called "The Science of Evil" by Simon Sasha Cohen. I'm sorry, Simon Baron Cohen. It's called "The Science of Evil," subtitle "On Empathy and the Origins of Cruelty." Wow, talk about full spectrum talk. I mean, the whole Asperger's engineering project, autism is an exercise in widespread cruelty. And he's doing a book critiquing the origins of it. And of course, he's going to lay it all out on Nazi scientists, right? Where the Jewish doctors who were sent over to London, the United States. And by the way, I'm going to be doing a talk because I want to get away from this notion that there are all Nazis and Germans who were involved. We already know about Peter Neubauer, who exploited fellow Jewish Americans through the adoption agencies in his twin studies, which are not that different from Dr. Mengele the Nazi. So I want to get away from that narrative. I want to expand. I want to blow it up, so to speak, peacefully, right? But just to give you an example, the first neuroscientist in America to make their impact was not Dr. Debra Soh or her tutors at York University in the Commonwealth of Canada. No, they were Jewish refugees who were brought into the United States to the state of Illinois under the guise of saving them from National Socialism. And maybe their lives were spared, but they formed the foundation of what today is the extension of eugenics, which is this expression of neuroscience. And I'm going to talk about this article. And for those of you who are on Patreon, you're going to get an excerpt, a review of it. You're going to get a preview of it. And so you can follow along. And so you know that I'm not just blowing it out of my patootie. And to demonstrate that it goes way beyond and deeper than Debra Soh, and that this talk here is going to demolish the myth of a Jewish psychiatric medical innocence in the post-war New World Order in this whole complex, using the genocide directed against gypsies, homosexuals, Jews, Slavs, and other political dissidents, communists, for example, using that as protective cover. That's already worn thin, even within the critical Jewish community. Walton Mearsheimer, people like that, people like Norman, can't remember his last name, punished heavily for writing a book, daring to write a book called The Holocaust Industry. Right, we know this. That's why Jerzy Kosinski was brought in to bring in this whole persecution narrative and further. And we found out he was a literary fraud. I didn't discover that. I'm just telling you right now. Okay. Now the real deal breaker for me is we wind up here getting to the top of the hour, and I gotta calm myself down and gather enough energy for I'm predicting going to be a wonderful conversation with my friend and colleague and the brother from another mother, John O'Loughlin. We're gonna, an hour from now. Please watch. It's going to be, we haven't seen each other for a while. And I'm reminding you because typically I'm on the last Thursday of the month, so it's kind of sort of out of sequence. So if you're inclined, if you have the wherewithal, the inclination, please join us there. We share many of the fine, above average quality audience. Okay, here's the final deal breaker where it comes to Debra Soh. And this is not speculation on my part. This comes right from the book. She's a self-proclaimed atheist. My gosh. How can you not look at the beauty of the human species, of the embryo, of the reproductive process, and all the vast cultures that have been developed over millennia, cross-culturally, along same lines through history, and all the wonderful culture that's been created. And these people are always faith, right? They're grounded in faith, whether it's Judaism, Buddhism, Islam, Christianity. It's many denominations and offshoots, and I'm not going to get into the heresies and all that. How can anybody who even looking at the brain itself and understanding or trying to investigate its processes as a scientist, right? That would do nothing but fill me with awe and wonderment, right? It's just like when Anton Chaikin, with that great conversation with my friend, colleague, and brother from another mother, John O'Loughlin, talked about that experience that the astronauts have when they're looking at the world from an entirely new perspective. I looked up at that phenomenon. It's well established. How can anybody who calls themselves a scientist, a neuroscience, a person who claims to be interested in humanity, declare themselves an atheist? It just mystifies me. Maybe that's cause for another topic. It's just really astounds me. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to moralize anymore. If you're an atheist, have at it. Just don't impose any of it on us. It's not going to work. Humanity is grounded in faith in God and the Almighty and the Creator. That's who we are. With that, I hope to see you in about an hour. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed, or at least managed to tolerate what I think was one of the better talks I've given as of late, which the only one to compare with is perhaps Peter Sellers. Thanks again, anyway. Right. We'll see you. Thank you. Bye.